Hello everyone, so glad you're joining me for this session of Cultural Compass, Navigating Your Global Classroom with me, Dr. Emma Howes. So let's get started. In my last video, I talked about the concept of culture shock and the different emotional phases that international students experience when they first enter a new country or a new culture, and how that can ultimately lead to growth if we take the time to address it and create a learning environment that fosters this growth and these experiences. So from that topic, on somewhat of a similar note, I thought a great follow-up would be to look at the experience of acculturation, specifically as it relates to international students. Acculturation is a term that is used in the field of psychology, basically to describe the changes that happen to someone's identity as a result of the meeting of cultures. So it is commonly used when looking at the experiences of immigrants or refugees or other groups that find themselves not within their own home culture. But it does affect both the individual and the groups who are involved. So in this context, both individual international students as well as their host communities or school or cultural group can experience changes in this process. So to start with a helpful framework of what acculturation all encompasses, I'll refer to Doctors David Sam and John Barry. They are psychologists who are experts in cultural psychology, and more specifically acculturation, and they present 4 separate experiences or strategies in how acculturation can appear or present itself and the ways in which identity can change. The very first is assimilation. This is actually sometimes used interchangeably with acculturation, but it is just one of the 4 ways that Sam and Barry present it. So this is when individuals from a non-dominant cultural group do not preserve their cultural identity, but more so blend and prioritize interacting with other cultures, whether this is from their own choice or from outside pressures to do so. The second acculturation strategy is integration. So this is when the non-dominant cultural group does prioritize interacting with the new or dominant culture, at the same time focusing on maintaining their own culture. The third is separation or segregation. This is when individuals really focus solely on maintaining their original culture and tend to avoid interaction with other cultural groups or the dominant group. This is a situation we hear a lot about with international students. If there are bigger groups of students all from one country or who share a language, who may not be branching out and stay in their comfort zone. And the final strategy or acculturation experience is marginalization. So this is more in the context of groups who maybe had to move involuntarily, again referring back to refugees or groups of immigrants where there is forced cultural loss, as well as exclusion and discrimination from a dominant cultural group. So hopefully not super relevant when discussing our international students, but still important to reference as a potential experience of acculturation. It is interesting to note that in a lot of the research on acculturation, integration is often viewed as the quote-unquote ideal approach or experience for international students, in that integration allows students to both maintain and even share essential aspects of their original culture, while still engaging with and adapting to their new cultural environment. And as international educators, we obviously highlight the importance of immersion and the benefits of focusing on using their English and taking part in U.S. practices and traditions, especially if they're living with a host family, to really get the most out of the experience. But this can also be done through the lens of exchange, in that they can still share pieces of their culture with their classrooms and host families or communities while participating in the U.S. culture as well. So the question is, how can we as educators foster this type of integration in our classrooms while also recognizing the challenges in trying to help? There is a really great article by Rachel Smith and Dr. Nigar Khawaja that highlights these concepts of acculturation as well as acculturative stress. So the psychological stress that results from the challenges that international students face while adapting their identity to a new culture. Their research highlights several common stressors that international students face that we may be pretty familiar with. This includes language barriers, homesickness, academic pressure, and the social isolation that can come from being within a new culture. Students might feel pressure to succeed while also struggling to communicate, or maybe even feeling torn between maintaining their cultural identity and trying to fit in. So it's important to understand that these stressors are normal, but that they can have serious effects on a student's mental and emotional well-being if not addressed. How can we bring this into our classrooms? One of the first interventions that they highlight is peer mentorship programs. and this is in reference specifically to a program called Excel, or Excellence in Cultural Experiential Learning and Leadership. This program was designed to help international students develop social and communication skills that are needed for that cross-cultural adaptation. This program used role plays and workshops and focused on real-life social scenarios for more experiential learning, like group work, asking your teacher for help, and making new friends. We can create peer-to-peer mentorship programs to ease the transition. You can pair international students with students who might be from the host country, or even those who have been through the acculturation process themselves, so other international students, that can help them build a more supportive network. The idea is that by enhancing this social competence, international students can integrate more effectively into the host culture and will ultimately reduce those feelings of isolation and other acculturative stress. Another intervention they present to encourage that integration is for teachers to create inclusive classrooms and spaces where international students feel safe and welcome to share their perspectives. They reference a great example of this kind of program, which is Pritchard and Skinner's Cross-Cultural Relationship Program. This approach emphasized building strong relationships between international students and domestic students to reduce those feelings of isolation. By encouraging these structured activities and discussions between students from different cultural backgrounds, the program ultimately helps to break down those barriers and increase mutual understanding. Research shows that international students who did feel that strong connection to their domestic peers ultimately experienced less acculturative stress and were better able to integrate into their new environments. For teachers, this could be facilitating cross-cultural dialogues, assignments to encourage cultural reflection, or structured peer mentoring like we saw from the Excel program, all of which will build to that inclusive environment in the classroom. Other practices that are highlighted, again, if we want to keep in mind the fostering or promoting of integration as opposed to assimilation or even separation, is to really encourage cultural exchange as a two-way street. So celebrating diversity in your classroom, encouraging students from the host culture to also learn from the international students, and for them to not only be immersed in the U.S. culture, but to share theirs with us, is what will really help students maintain their cultural identity while also engaging in the new one. Finally, monitoring for signs of stress and staying proactive as teachers and educators in recognizing the signs of acculturative stress. Students might become withdrawn, show signs of anxiety or depression, or even struggle academically, similarly to that period of culture shock where they may be experiencing crisis in the U-curve or defense or denial from the DMIS model. So just to remember to keep an open line of communication, check in with students regularly, and refer them to support services if needed. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the Cambridge Insider YouTube channel so that you don't miss any of our upcoming videos, including the next Cultural Compass video, in which we will start to explore intercultural communication and how culture can impact our communication styles.